I am here with Rachel Wallis, and we are talking, earlier today we were talking about her project, the Gone But Not Forgotten project, which is a quilt dedicated to the memory and preserving the memory of victims of police violence, victims of police killing in Chicago. And as a part of this project, I also invited Rachel to give an evening lecture about quilting practice more generally. And so without any further ado, I will turn it over to Rachel.
Thanks so much, Miguel, and thanks, guys, for having me here tonight. It's been a pleasure. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my own practice, sort of where it came from, and hopefully where it's going. Come on in.
Hi, come on in. It's intimate.
It is very intimate. Eat some brownies.
Might have your head in the camera if you're
sorry. So yeah, as Miguel said, my name is Rachel Wallis, and I am a self-taught printmaker, embroiderer, screen printer, and now quilter. And for most of my life, I've really considered myself an activist or a maker. I didn't really think of the work I was doing as art or myself as an artist until fairly recently. But I always used art as a strategy in the organizing work I was doing, either through bringing in political artists from Mexico to show their work here about the struggles they were involved in, or using art as a fundraiser for groups I worked with. I am also the co-founder of a project called Craftwork, and Craftwork is dedicated to exploring the intersection between fine art and craft technique. And through the process of organizing a curated show and some workshops on art and craft, it was really sort of the first point when I felt comfortable sort of moving beyond the role of crafter into the role of artist and sort of talking about my work as fine art. Most of my work right now is in quilting, and in particular collaborative quilting. And there are a lot of reasons behind that. I mean, you can't talk about quilts without talking about gender, without talking about labor, without talking about value, and without bringing in so much history. And sort of culturally, especially in the US, almost every sort of community in the US has a culture of quilting, sort of across geographic or racial boundaries. So I think it's a really powerful mean to explore sort of complex projects, but also it's a very slow, laborious process. So the time it takes you to slow down and make a quilt really gives you a lot of time to think through and discuss and sort of learn about the ideas behind the quilt. So this is a picture of half of a quilt that me and my collaborator with Craftwork made called His Hours. It's a hand-dyed, hand-sewn, hand-quilted exact reproduction of a Damien Hirst lithograph that is part of a larger project, again, on sort of art and value and labor and gender.
Hi, come on in.
I first started doing specifically collaborative quilt work with a group of mostly women from Pilsen and Little Village in Chicago called El Stitchivich. And we did a combination of sort of get-togethers, installations, sewing, but we also have made a couple of collaborative quilt pieces. So this is a piece called Quilted Souls that we did as an installation for the National Museum of Mexican Fine Art Day of the Dead exhibit. And so women produced embroidered squares referencing women in their own lives who had died, and we put them together into a quilt. And through that process, we really got to learn about the stories and the personal histories and the practices of all of these families, their migration stories. And it was sort of a really rich collective process, which really led us towards sort of doing more collective quilting specifically. So this is a piece that's untitled but called Homicide Quilt that we created in 2013, again with 13 members of the Stitchy Bitch Collective. And this is a textile map of the city of Chicago with the names of everyone who was killed in the year 2013 within the city, embroidered in the neighborhood that they were killed in. So this was over 400 names. We did it with a group of 13 women over about 3 months in total, dividing up the neighborhoods, sewing in public places, also in our own homes, and creating this installation. And a couple of things came out of that I think were really important to my practice. The process was so much more important than the outcome. Like our own personal process of taking the time to embroider the names, to think about the scale of violence in the city on an individual level, was so powerful that in some ways it felt like a letdown to then show this quilt and have people sort of walk by it, but not necessarily feel the weight of what we had put into it. We also got a fair amount of news coverage, but the sort of deeper conversation we were hoping to have didn't necessarily get covered in the news. So we made this in a moment of a lot of hysteria about the murder rate in Chicago, and our sort of main takeaway from this is you can't talk about violence in Chicago as though Chicago was one place. Like Chicago is the most segregated major city in America. This violence is impacting some neighborhoods enormously and some neighborhoods not at all. And that's because of like a willful political decision making and disinvestment from certain parts of the city. But a lot of the coverage was just like, oh my God, violence is out of control. Won't somebody think of the children? So that was a little bit frustrating to us. But in the process of making the quilt, we also realized that there were a lot of people whose names weren't getting counted. So the week before we installed this in April of 2014, a story came out in Chicago Magazine that found that the Chicago Police Department had been consistently and intentionally misclassifying homicides as unknown cause of death, so as to keep the murder rate down, because there was a lot of pressure for them to keep the murder rate under 500 and even more specifically under 400 if possible that year. So Chicago Magazine was able to uncover cases of like a woman whose body was found tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse, which they did not label as a homicide. So we spent the day of the installation adding patches to the quilt to try and include these names, that it felt really important to us that this be a complete piece. But in talking to the reporters about it and about that sort of issue, one of the reporters mentioned to me, and he was like, hey, you know whose name isn't on here is people who are killed by the police. And that was the moment when I found out that people who are killed by the police in Chicago are not included in the running homicide count. They're not included in the lists collected by, the Red Eye or DNA Info or the Sun-Times. And they're not counted as homicides by the city of Chicago. And I got really interested in that and in this question of like whose names are counted and whose lives are not. And as I said, this was the spring of 2014. And really became the birth of what's now Gone But Not Forgotten. So in June of 2013, a young man named Dominique Franklin was killed by the Chicago police. He was picked up on suspicion of shoplifting in Old Town and was tasered repeatedly, knocked over, and hit his head against a lamppost and died 4 days later. And Damo was an activist in his community of Rogers Park. He was involved with members of a group called Circles and Ciphers, which is a restorative justice project involving young men of color in Rogers Park. And faced with his death, the group of people around him had to think about what to do with his legacy. And what they did was form a group called We Charge Genocide. They were named after a petition that came out of the civil rights movement, where a group of well-known Black activists, writers, academics, performers petitioned the United Nations to see violence and repression of African Americans in the U.S. as a part of a systemic overall political process, as part of what they considered a process of genocide. And if you look at those complaints, almost all of them are relevant to the lives of young people of color in Chicago today. So the young people of We Church Genocide put together their own research, held public hearings, and eventually went before the United Nations in Geneva, the Commission on Torture. This is them testifying there. That's a picture of Dominique or Damo. And Damo's name was included in the final report. I mean, it was a really powerful action for a group of people all under the age of 25. And it was really clear to me, seeing their work and the thoughtfulness and the power of what they were doing, that this was a group I wanted to partner with on this project, that I wanted to record the names of people who had been killed by the police in Chicago. But it couldn't just be a piece in a gallery. It had to be working hand in hand with sort of committed activism so that it couldn't be depoliticized and it couldn't be decontextualized, that it lived within this movement. So by last fall, the project was sort of launched, and the form of Gone But Not Forgotten is a series of combination quilting circles and peace circles. And peace circles is sort of a ritualized conversation. It's come out of restorative justice practices, and it's a way of sort of resolving conflict or having an open and honest conversation within a community. And I thought it was it felt very connected to me to the history of quilting circles, but it also helped tie this project further into people who are working for alternative models of justice and of accountability in their own communities that were outside of the prison system or outside of the police system or the legal system. So each quilting circle was led by trained circle keepers. There's a sort of series of important talking pieces in the center of the room. You put together values that you're sharing as a community. And it creates a space for a very diverse group of people to have an honest conversation in a way that might be complicated otherwise. And what we were doing in these circles was embroidering the name, age, and date of death of everyone who's been killed by the Chicago police since 2006. Right now, according to our research, it's been 143 people were killed either in police custody or by the Chicago Police Department since 2006. We know the names of around 100 of them. There are another 40 individuals who we maybe know their age or their date of death, but we don't know who they were and can't find evidence of that. There are at least 10 people who show up in city statistics as having been killed by the Chicago police that we can't connect to any cases. So there are 10 totally unknown cases that just exist in a data discrepancy in the city of Chicago. And there's no real way to unpack that. There's no formal list of individuals who are killed by the police, and it's really difficult to get even the degree of information that we have. So we were, over the fall, with funding from the Department of Cultural Affairs and special events in the city of Chicago, we organized a series of 6 quilting circles that were really intentionally organized in very different neighborhoods and with very different community groups across the city of Chicago. So as far south as Trinity UCC Church at 95th Street, the National Museum of Mexican Fine Art in Rogers Park, and a number of organizations in between. This is Blocks Together, a community organizing group in West Humboldt Park. We did a quilting circle with some of the youth who were involved with their programs. But sort of in every space, we had a very different group of people with sort of very different personal experience with police and policing. And since that sort of funded group of circles came to an end, the quilting has continued. The final quilt is going to be around 30 to 35 feet long. As you can see there, it's a combination of memorial squares and traditional sort of prairie style quilted pieces. It's all blue and white and made from donated fabric. But it's a very slow process. We're still sort of in the active process of quilting. We hope to have the sewing done by June, with the goal of displaying it this coming fall together with process photos and video installations featuring interviews with the family and friends of the victims featured in the quilts. But it's been a huge learning experience for me. It's certainly the largest project that I have ever organized or even been involved with. We've had like 10 to 12 circles over the last 9 months. Probably upwards of 150 to 200 people have participated over the life of the project. We're almost done embroidering the squares, but it's sort of just in its scale and in the layers of relationships with people. It's sort of unlike anything I've done before, and in the process of doing it, I've actually been able to schedule or sort of structure my graduate studies around this. So this piece predates my graduate program, but I am currently enrolled in a low residency master's in socially engaged art through the Moore College of Art and Design in Philadelphia. So I'm there during the summers and here during the year. But it's been really good to sort of give me a theoretical framework for this project as I'm doing it. I don't come from a fine art background. I didn't necessarily have the same kind of history and theory to approach this project before I started. And I'm sort of an organizer, so I know how to make a quilt and get people together and make a quilt, but I don't necessarily know how to work with galleries or publish about my work or write about my work. So it's been sort of an interesting process for me, sort of working on this very grassroots project while sort of thinking about it academically with a very different group of people outside of the people who are doing the work. But hopefully by August I will have written a thesis on documentation of collaborative and durational artwork, and we'll have a quilt to show for it. So that's sort of the formal structure of my work. I have a video about the process. I don't actually know if this is hooked up to speakers, but it just has music in the background. So it's 5 minutes long.
I believe we're hooked up to speakers.
Okay.
As long as the HDMI is plugged in, I think that's
excellent. There's no dialogue, so it's going to be fine. So I'm just going to play this to give you sort of a sense of what the participants' experience was of this project, and then open up the floor to...
And I'm going to control volume because it may be quite loud.
Okay. I'm going to lower it on my end as well, and we can work our way up.
Yes.
name, won't you say his name? Kimani Gray, say his name. Kimani Gray, say his name. Kimani Gray, won't you say his name? John Crawford, say his name. John Crawford, say his name. John Crawford, say his name. John Crawford, won't you say his name? Michael Brown, say his name. Michael Brown, say his name. Michael Brown, say his name. Michael Brown, won't you say his name? Say his name. 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 Won't you say his name?
I just wanted to, there is one more slide, I promise. There you go. I just wanted to open the floor for questions or discussion about either this project or projects you were working on.
Yeah. Who made that video for you?
I made that video.
You made that video for you.
I did as part of my master's program.
Wow.
I took a class called Communication and Context, which was about documenting collaborative art. So that I made the video for my final project, and then I had it. And that was the, when I talk about sort of the connections between my master's work and this project, it's really worked out for me well in sort of giving me a structure to think about this.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge question. I'm here with my American Studies hat on tonight, but if I could just wear my art history hat for 2 more minutes, 30 more seconds. I was interested, something that we talk about a lot is how to document collaborative art and also how to document process art, durational art. It's it's very complicated because you're working with multiple people and sometimes what is the artwork itself, and like you said earlier in your presentation, which I thought was so useful, is that it's almost as though the final product is second to the process of executing it. So it is the collaboration, it's the activism that is present in the community collaboration, which is the work of the project. So, even this slideshow is about documentation, but even that is never going to be the complete thing, right? I mean,
yeah, and I've been, I feel like my thinking about this is sort of consistently evolving. So like, at the beginning I was like, well, the process is the work. It doesn't even matter what you create. It's the quilting process that is this project. But I'm increasingly sort of being challenged to think about how it will exist in exhibition form and how the exhibition will continue to evolve with it. So that means things like we're going to have not only panel discussions inside the exhibition, but like know your rights workshops. Or we've asked an artist activist collective called For the People Artist Collective, who are connected to We Charge Genocide, to produce a zine that will be available free at the exhibit. That'll have like political and social context to the exhibit, but also ways that people can take action around the issue. But I've also been thinking about it, like for my thesis, I have been reading a lot about like 7 days performance art. And the ways it was or was not documented, and what, performance artists who would say, you can't document this art is only experienced by me in the performance, that's all that exists of it. A photograph is useless, a video is useless, I'm the only person who can experience the art. And thinking about that in terms of my own relationship to this process, like doing this project has been really hard. Like it involves engaging with trauma on like a sort of visceral level on a really regular basis. And so thinking about this project as also being a part of the project is also me performing grieving, right? Like it's an individual process for myself of taking time to grieve for people in a way that feels sincere, and that for me is as much of the process as anything else. But yeah, I don't know what the answer is going to be about what is the piece, and I think it'll continue to change over the life of the project.
Can you talk a little bit about the things that come up during the quilting circle?
Yeah, I mean, we've had the quilting circles in such diverse settings and with really different groups of people. So it really ranges from people who have sort of had no personal negative experiences with the police, have always felt like the police were there to protect them, to we did a circle in Rogers Park a couple of weeks ago when one of the participants was sitting at a table with somebody embroidering the name of someone he knew in high school. So it really ranges from people who have very personal experience with this to it being sort of an abstract political discussion. I think I hear from a lot of people who have come to the circles that, they see this on the news and they read about it in the paper and they feel really helpless, and that this appeals to them in terms of being able to do something, an activity that feels useful faced with the sort of the enormity of the death. But I think the other thing that's really powerful for people is reading these stories out loud and hearing about each of these individuals and how they were killed, when we have this information, is the sort of mundanity of all of this. Like in all of these situations, it was somebody who was panhandling or loitering or doing a small-scale drug deal or was suspected of stealing an iPod from somebody. There's a 16-year-old who was killed by the police, who he and his friends stole an iPod from someone, and he was killed, and his friend was sentenced to life in prison because he was involved in a felony that resulted in someone's death, in which case you're charged as the murderer in that case. So he was...
Not the police?
No, he was convicted essentially of the murder of his friend because their felonious act, the armed robbery of the iPod, led to his friend's death. So he was, as the co-defendant, responsible for his friend's death. So I think, we hear on the news about the sort of really outrageous cases and the totally indefensive cases. And we hear about, the Laquan McDonalds and the Rakia Boyds, but this is happening not every day, but 20 to 30 times a year this is happening. And it's happening over things that are frequently really trivial.
Every other week, essentially.
Yeah. And I think really sitting with that and being like, how did we get to a place where people are dying over this is really an important part of the process.
So in our group, some of the things that came up were age. So a lot of people being surprised about either how young some of the victims were or how old some of the victims were. Some of the things that came up were the unknown, and that being a really significant. I mean, in our group today we had, let's say, 20 people, and maybe 5 or 6 are unknown. So that's kind of like a random sampling of.
So the unknowns are less random than they might be because we've been trying to identify everybody that we can.
Right.
As we get to the process, there's sort of more of the lost cause unknowns that we really won't be able to.
I mean, people were impressed by that. Is what I'm trying to say. And then also the issue of mental illness came up. That a number of the victims were indigent or mentally ill or whatever it might be, and that oftentimes those are people who are kind of invisible in society anyway for a number of reasons, but also now suffering and victimized by police, and then their invisibility is even further kind of cemented that way.
And there was recently a national study that came out that found that more than 50% of the individuals killed by the police nationally were living with some sort of disability, whether physical or mental or intellectual. So, I mean, that plays a huge role. And there are a number, probably more than 5 or 6 of cases that we know of on the quilt where people's friends or family members called the police because they were worried that someone was suicidal and that the person ended up being killed by the police. So that these attempts to sort of save someone's life directly resulted in their life being taken, which is especially tragic, I think.
More questions?
So how did you get to the bottom of the names of the people who, aren't published? And that sort of, I don't know if I missed that in the first.
No. It's been a long and sort of complex process. So every quarter, the Independent Police Review Authority, which is charged with investigating all police killings and charges of abuse of force by the police, they release a quarterly report that gives the number of fatal encounters that happened during that quarter, but just as a solid number without any data. So we have, to some degree, a sense of how many people the city of Chicago thinks that the police killed each year. And then in subsequent years, as IPRA, or the Independent Police Review Authority, does their own internal investigations, they release severely redacted reports, so that have race, age, date of death, and gender. So for most of these cases, we were either able to start with news searches and then match them up to IPRA reports, or start with IPRA reports and find newspaper articles about it. And as you can expect, it got a lot easier the further you go. Not only because
Further as in more recent?
more recent, yeah.
Yeah.
Not only because the access to the news coverage is better, but also, particularly if you look at 2006 or 2007, all we would be able to find about people would be an article that said, over the weekend, 13 people were killed in gun violence, 2 of them were killed by the police, and nothing else, no other relevant information. Whereas, especially since in the last year and a half, with the activism, particularly after Trayvon Martin's death, the media is doing a much better job of finding this information and sort of painting a broader picture about the victims. But since 2006, on a year-by-year basis, we don't have a single year where the number of cases we found matches the number of cases that the city of Chicago reported. So either their numbers are significantly greater than ours, or for a number of years, our numbers are significantly greater than theirs. So the years where we found 16 to 18 people who had been killed by the police, and they only reported 13. So there's really no...
And is there a freedom of information request that you can...
They are concerned about the privacy of the individuals who have been killed by the police. There's also the potential of further legal action, so they won't release any of this information under FOIA. And as far as I know, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, like the Google Doc that I have put together with a lot of help is the most complete public list of individuals who have been killed by the police, which is sort of horrifying because I'm just making this up as I go along. I mean, I'm not a journalist, I'm not a researcher, I don't have formal training in this. This is just like a lot of Googling and getting better at Googling, honestly. But yeah, it's really complicated and it's really opaque. There's some hope that with the Justice Department investigation that's going on right now, a lot of those sort of files are going to be opened up to public review and we'll have a better sense of what's gone on. But there have definitely been cases in the most recent last couple of years where a journalist, really matched quarter by quarter the reports to the numbers released by IPRA and was able to go to the city and say, you're definitely not counting one of these 6 cases, which one is it? And got people re-added to the list who had been classified as a suicide instead of a police killing. So, but it's sort of slow going.
And has Red Eye stopped their homicide tracker?
So when I started this process, Red Eye wasn't including police killings in the homicide tracker. So that the homicide tracker is actually where I got the data for the homicide quilts. They have all of it in a downloadable Excel spreadsheet. It's really, I don't know if they're now including police killings. For the last couple of years, The Guardian has a really great interactive map of police killings in the U.S. That is definitely worth going through. And I found a case from 2015 when I was already working on the project that I had missed in the news, but The Guardian had a piece about. So it's the landscape of this kind of research has changed dramatically since this project began. And we're even now, since the Laquan McDonald video came out, there are individuals who were originally only had a 1-paragraph news story to go on. We're now there's video that's been released, or tons of lawsuits filed. Philip Coleman, who was killed, he died after being tased repeatedly by the Chicago police. In November, they released video of this sort of hours before his death, if not his actual killing. So again, more information is being uncovered sort of on a
I'm also just curious
basis.
if any of the family members of people killed were involved in making the quilt or their stars or the names.
So one of the people involved in the initial organizing of the project, her uncle was killed by the police. He was actually killed in 1999, but the family asked that he be included. And our general feeling is we're erring on the side of including. We are doing a video installation to go with the quilt that's going to include video interviews with families and friends of some of the victims that we were able to be in touch with. At least one of the other victims was submitted by his sister, who reached out to me by internet. But so far, we haven't had family members at quilting circles where they're quilting. We've had some interest from some people, but it hasn't happened. And I can understand, there are family members who are doing really incredible activism right now. Martina Sutton, Rukia Boyd's brother, has been a tireless organizer. The mother of Ronald Johnson but there's a degree to which these people are having to like reenact the trauma of the most terrible moment of their life repeatedly and in public, that I'm hesitant to add to. Like, I think if this is, I was in touch with someone who works with members of Betty Jones's family. She was killed in December, and she was like, I'd like to offer them the opportunity to embroider their mother's star. And I was like, if they are interested, we'll make it happen, but also I only want this to be helpful to people, rather than sort of re-traumatizing, if that makes sense.
Is there any significance to starting at 2006, or was that just a...
The Independent Police Review Authority was started in 2006.
Oh.
So that's the point. You know, when we started this, I was like, well, I'm going back to 2006 because there's enough records, but it's really a pity that it's 9 years instead of 10 years. I did not realize how long this project was going to take. So now we've got a decade, and that has a nice roundness to it. But really, before that, it's almost impossible to find any of this information. And even in the last 2 months, IBRA changed their website and has taken down all the 2006 and 2007 cases off the website. So even that information is gone. Their website only goes back to 2008 now. So.
Thankfully, you started chronologically in 2006 then, instead of arbitrarily in the middle or something, you know?
And this has happened a couple of times where there were IBRA files saved on a server that like disappeared. Chicago Tribune used to have the actual text of the files on their website, and they came down. And I've gotten better about like really saving the research material, because there's no, you can't be sure that it'll continue to exist for month to month. So yeah.
I was wondering, has there been like any police outreach to you at all, or?
We had one member of the Chicago Police Department participate in a quilting circle. It was sort of amazing to have her there. She's great. She works for a program called Bridging the Divide, which is between the Chicago Police Department and the YMCA. It's about improving relationships between young people of color and the Chicago Police Department. So that's like the only sort of person-to-person interaction we've had about it. I am not like, there are a number of restorative justice programs in Chicago working with the Chicago Police Department, and I'm like really glad that work is going on. It's also sort of not where I am right now. I'm not in a place where I'm interested in having a dialogue with the Chicago Police Department. So part of it is just sort of being like, I'm glad that somebody's doing that work, but it can't be me right now. I really want to make this about the victims and about their communities. And so that's been the priority for this project. Anybody else?
I was curious about the program you're in for your master's, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, so where is that again, and what
It's
is that
a-
like? Or?
So it's a new program. It's the first, I'm in the first cohort.
Mm-hmm.
So it's at Moore College of Art and Design, which is, for undergrad, it's a women's school in Philadelphia. But it was started by Daniel Tucker, who is an amazing artist and activist who was really involved in Chicago for many years. Got his MFA at UIC and then went out to Moore to start the program. So when I heard that he was starting this program and started looking at it, for me, it seemed like a perfect option. It's not an MFA. I'm not interested in learning technique in a formal setting. I really like learning it from my peers and learning it sort of traditionally passed down. But I do need the sort of support and structure of the theoretical framework. So it was exciting me to have the possibility of having the master's without an MFA. And it's low residency, so I can continue doing my work and working in Chicago while continuing in
You
the
spend
program.
summers involved, like physically there? or
So
something?
6 weeks during the summer, physically on campus, and then online courses the rest of the year, and a lot of like video conferencing. But it's a really fascinating program. It's still sort of figuring out its identity, but they've been able to involve a lot of really incredible like social practice artists nationally. Rick Lowe, who started Project Row House in Texas, was there this summer. We were able to work with him. We work very closely with the Philadelphia Mural Arts Project program, so it's a really good. It's such a new discipline that people are sort of making it up as they go along, but I feel like we're really able to interact closely with the people who are making it up as they go along. So,
That's cool.
yeah.
Are there any other programs like that nationally or internationally?
It is really one of the first social practice graduate programs. And there's also an MFA in social practice as well, running concurrently, and we have some overlapping curriculum. But no, it's a new adventure. And I know Daniel and his work, and he's brilliant. So a lot of my going into it was really wanting to learn what he knows.
And what are the requirements, or what are the,
That is
parameters of it, and what you have to complete, I guess?
so to get into it, the other thing that appealed to me is there's no requirement for studio credits. So you don't have to be a working artist or a formally trained artist to do the master's program. The master's program is a year and a half. The MFA program is 2.5 years. And you do a thesis exhibition and like a written research document at the end of it. And the classes sort of cover everything from the history of social practice to research, social practice as research, and research strategies in social practice, project management, fundraising, documentation. So like a real mix of like practical and theoretical skills. Yeah, you should check it out.
Yeah.
It's also, because it's a low residency program, it is like pretty affordable as graduate degrees go, both because it's sort of a limited number of on-campus credits, but also because you can work while you're doing it, which has been great.
Sweet.
www.more.edu.
I know, there's a video of me talking about the program on the
Nice.
website, as though this was not enough. Anyone else?
We just have a few minutes remaining, so does anybody have any other questions?
I was hoping we were gonna quilt tonight.
Oh, you're gonna have to
I
come.
wasn't sure.
We did it this afternoon
Oh,
with one of the classes,
okay.
but I'll get your information.
Oh,
We're
sure.
having probably like another 4 or 5 more quilting circles in the next couple of months,
Good.
mostly in Chicago, but not.
I live in the city, yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll get your information and let
Okay.
you know.
Sweet, thanks.
There's gonna be a Black Lives Matter exhibit at Gallery 400 starting in April.
Oh.
So hopefully we're gonna have at least one public circle in that exhibit, which I think will be a really awesome place to do this work.
Right, and if
So-
any of you want to be added to the list to know when these events are coming up, you should let Rachel know.
Yeah, I had a clipboard. It's in my trunk, but we can just put your information on here.
All right, thank you so much.
Eat some brownies. Eat a lot of brownies. There are a lot of brownies. And feel free, if you have any more questions, to email me. I have some cards. I'm happy to talk about all of this.
Yeah.